When pride meets justice, courtroom clash shatters silence and sparks a fight for respect that changes a city forever. The morning air outside the courthouse was tense. People moved around, some going to work, some just walking past. But inside courtroom number 4, something unusual was about to happen, something that would make people talk for months. Marcus Ellison walked in, wearing his long black robe, carrying the calm expression he always wore. He was in his mid-50s, tall and steady, with a voice that didn't need to shout to be heard. Over the years, he had earned respect in the city for being fair, wise, and quiet. He had seen many cases, from petty theft to serious crimes. Never rushed to judgment, and he always looked at both sides before speaking. Everyone in the courtroom stood as he entered, as was the rule. He nodded and took his seat. Across the room stood Officer Rebecca Callahan. She was a white female officer in her early 30s, dressed neatly in her police uniform. Her back was straight, her chin high, and her eyes sharp. She had only been in the force for 7 years, but she acted like she had served for decades. Many in the department called her confident. Others whispered that she was arrogant. Today, she was in court for a case she thought would be over quickly. She had arrested a young black man named Darnell Hayes during what she described as a routine stop gone wrong. She believed this would be just another hearing. She didn't know this case would turn into something much bigger. Darnell sat beside his public defender. He was only 22, a college student majoring in sociology. He wore a simple button-up shirt and black trousers. He looked nervous but not scared. His mother sat behind him, holding her purse tightly in her lap, her eyes never leaving her son. She had raised him to stay out of trouble. Darnell had never been in a courtroom before, and today wasn't supposed to be like this. As the hearing began, Officer Callahan walked to the stand. Judge Ellison greeted her with a polite nod and asked her to confirm her name and position. She did so, but not in the respectful way people usually did in court. She didn't say, "Your Honor." She didn't even make eye contact with the judge. Instead, she looked bored, like she had better things to do. From the first few minutes, people could feel the tension. She began to tell her version of the story. She said she had pulled Darnell over for a broken taillight. Then she claimed he acted nervous and aggressive, which made her suspect. He might be hiding something, she said. She asked him to step out of the car, and when he hesitated, she believed he was resisting. She admitted she pushed him against the car and handcuffed him. No drugs, weapons, or illegal items were found. Still, she charged him with resisting arrest and disturbing the peace. Judge Ellison listened quietly, his hands folded in front of him. He didn't interrupt her, just watched her closely, his eyes calm but focused. Then he asked a few questions, simple ones. What made her think he was aggressive? Did he raise his voice? Did he threaten her? Her answers were vague. Said he looked aggressive and seemed like he was about to do something. When the judge pressed further, she became defensive. At one point, when asked why she didn't include a full description of Darnell's behavior in her report, she sighed loudly and said, "I don't see why we're wasting time on this. Did my job?" Her tone was cold and dismissive. The courtroom went quiet. People looked around, surprised. No one, not even senior officers, spoke to Judge Ellison that way. Still, he didn't react. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't frown. He simply wrote something down on his notepad and continued. But everyone in the room noticed it, especially the disrespect in her voice, not just toward the judge, but toward the process, the defendant, and even the truth. The defense lawyer stood up next. He asked Officer Callahan about her experience, about how many stops she'd made, and if she remembered Darnell having any weapons or making threats. She said no, and he asked if she had her body camera on during the stop. She said it was not functioning that day. That raised eyebrows. Body cameras were standard now, not functioning. On that particular day, the judge asked if there was dash cam footage from her police vehicle. Officer Callahan hesitated. She said it might exist, but she hadn't reviewed it. That was unusual. Most officers checked their footage before coming to court. Again, Judge Ellison made a quiet note. The hearing went on for another hour. Darnell's lawyer explained that his client had never been arrested, had a clean record, and was driving home after visiting his grandmother. He said the taillight wasn't broken, it was working fine. He asked the court to review traffic camera footage from the area. Still, Officer Callahan acted like none of it mattered. She rolled her eyes at one of the questions. She smirked when the defense talked about Darnell's good grades. She crossed her arms, leaned back, and looked at her. Phone more than once? It wasn't just rude, it was bold. Some in the gallery whispered in disbelief. Others stayed silent, but their eyes said everything at one point. A woman in the back, likely from a community organization, whispered, "She doesn't care about the truth. Look at her face." Judge Ellison heard it but said nothing. He wasn't ready to speak, not yet. When the hearing ended, the judge took a deep breath. He looked around the courtroom and said in a calm voice, "We will reconvene tomorrow. I want all dashcam and body cam footage submitted to the court, whether functioning or not. And I want Officer Callahan's full report on the arrest, including any handwritten notes she may have made. Court is adjourned." He tapped his gavel. Everyone stood up again. Officer Callahan didn't even glance at the judge as she walked out. She didn't know that something had shifted. She thought the judge was weak, too soft to challenge her. She thought this was over. Outside the courthouse, Darnell's mother hugged him tightly. "You were brave," she said quietly. Darnell looked unsure. "Do you think he believed me?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "I think he saw everything." Inside his chambers, Judge Ellison removed his robe and sat down at his desk. He picked up his pen again, but this time he wasn't just taking notes. He was making a plan. He knew something wasn't right. He had seen that kind of arrogance before, but rarely so openly. He had dealt with tough officers, angry lawyers, even disrespectful defendants. But today had been different. This wasn't just about one young man. This was about how some people carried power like a weapon, not a responsibility. He had seen that look in Officer Callahan's eyes, like she didn't need to explain herself. Like she didn't believe she would ever be questioned, but she was wrong. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to scold her in front of the court. That wasn't his way. Instead, he would let the law speak. He would let the truth unfold, step by step. Because justice was not loud or flashy. It was careful, steady. And in this courtroom, it was watching. That night, news of the courtroom exchange spread through the city. People talked about the way the officer acted, the way the judge stayed calm, and the way the defendant looked when he heard someone finally listening. Some said nothing would come of it. Others said this time felt different. In his home, Judge Ellison looked over Officer Callahan's past record again. A few complaints here and there, nothing serious, at least on paper. But the more he looked, the more he noticed a pattern: too many stops, too many vague reasons, and nearly all of them involving young black men. He didn't jump to conclusions. He just kept reading. Because tomorrow, he knew, would not be just another day in court. Tomorrow, the story would begin to unfold. Slowly, carefully, powerfully, and justice, in its quiet, unshakable way, would begin to rise. The courtroom had emptied, but Judge Marcus Ellison sat alone at his desk, surrounded by silence and paperwork. Outside, the city moved on with its usual rhythm cars honking, people walking past in a hurry, conversations buzzing on street corners. But inside the judge's chambers, the air was still. Something about today's hearing had unsettled him deeply. He had seen many officers give testimony in his courtroom before. Some were nervous, some confident, a few even arrogant. But Officer Rebecca Callahan's attitude was different. Her words, her tone, the way she looked at him, it had all been coated with something more than pride. It felt like disrespect, not just to him, but to the court itself. He leaned back in his chair and took a deep breath. There had been many moments in his career when he had to look past emotions and focus on facts. But this case stirred something more personal. It wasn't just about the young man Darnell Hayes. It was about truth, power, and the people who believed they were above both. Judge Ellison didn't waste time. He opened a file on his computer and requested a copy of Officer Callahan's recent performance reports. He also requested any available dashcam footage from the day Darnell was arrested. It wasn't something he usually did this early in a case, but today felt different. He didn't want to judge her based on her attitude. He wanted to look at her actions, her record, her decisions, and her behavior in the field. Over the next few hours, he read every detail of her arrest reports. From the last 2 years, he noticed a strange pattern. Officer Callahan had made more stops in predominantly black neighborhoods than any other officer in her precinct. Even though those areas weren't her assigned zones most of the time, many of her reports use vague terms like suspicious behavior, nervous movements, or failure to comply without clear explanation. There were several complaints filed by citizens, not enough to get her suspended, but enough to raise a red flag for anyone who was paying attention. One complaint described how she pulled over a young black couple for improper lane usage. Even though no violation was recorded on traffic cameras, another said she threatened to arrest a teenager for questioning why he was being stopped on his way home from school. All of the complaints had been investigated, but no action had been taken. Most were labeled as unfounded or insufficient evidence. Judge Ellison closed the file slowly. It wasn't just about one arrest anymore. This was a pattern, and patterns told stories even when people didn't. He leaned forward and picked up his notepad. He wrote down a single sentence. History matters. That night, he couldn't sleep. His thoughts kept returning to Darnell's face, Shung confused, unsure why he was sitting in a courtroom for doing nothing wrong. And he thought about Callahan, so sure of herself, so certain that her badge made her untouchable. Judge Ellison had worked for decades to bring balance to the justice system. He had fought to become a judge, not because of ambition, but because he believed in fairness. In this case, small as it might have seemed at first, touched something deep in him. It reminded him of stories from his childhood, how his own father had once been wrongfully arrested and humiliated in front of his children for simply walking home from work in the wrong neighborhood. The next morning, Judge Ellison arrived at the courthouse early. He met privately with the public defender assigned to Darnell's case. The young attorney, named Marissa Lopez, was smart and passionate. She had graduated from a respected law school and had chosen public defense because she believed in giving voice to the unheard. She shared everything she had learned about Darnell, his clean record, his college scholarship, and the fact that his taillight had not been broken, despite what Officer Callahan claimed. She had already requested footage from a nearby gas station. That showed Darnell's car passing by with both taillights working just minutes before the arrest. "I think she targeted him," Marissa said, her voice calm but firm. "There's no legal reason he should have been arrested." Judge Ellison nodded but didn't share what he had already discovered. He didn't want to cloud the process. He thanked her for her work and reminded her to stay focused on facts. Still inside, he was building a case not as a prosecutor, but as a guardian of the law. Later that afternoon, Judge Ellison invited Darnell's mother to speak with him privately, with her son and attorney present. He had no obligation to do this. It was unusual, but not improper as long as both sides were informed. Darnell's mother, a schoolteacher, named Gloria Hayes, was a strong, proud woman in her early 40s. She had raised Darnell mostly on her own, teaching him to always respect authority, stay polite, and never give anyone a reason to doubt him. "My son is not perfect, Your Honor," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "But he didn't deserve what happened to him. I've worked hard to keep him on the right path. It's all I've done. I just don't want him punished for being who he is." Darnell sat beside her, quiet but alert. When asked if he had anything to say, he simply said, "I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten her. I just didn't understand why I was being pulled out of my car." Judge Ellison watched them closely. There was no anger in their eyes, only confusion, disappointment, and hope. Hope that someone was listening. Hope that someone still cared about what was fair. After the meeting, the judge sat alone again. He pulled out a new file this time, a citywide report on officer misconduct. He combed through it for hours, searching for anything connected to Officer Callahan. One thing stood out. Despite her short time on the force, her name had come up more often than others with longer service. He made a list of those cases and requested internal review documents. Some might call this overstepping, but Judge Ellison believed that the courtroom was not just a place for legal decisions, it was a place where truth should rise. even when it was hidden deep under the surface. Meanwhile, Officer Callahan was completely unaware of the storm building around her. Back at her precinct, she laughed about the hearing with two of her fellow officers. She told them how the judge barely said anything and acted like a community social worker instead of someone in charge. She bragged about how she'd probably get a commendation for dealing with a non-compliant suspect. One officer, an older man named Sergeant Lewis, gave her a long look. "You might want to tone it down, Rebecca," he said cautiously. "Ellison isn't the kind of man to forget that kind of disrespect. He's got a memory like a steel trap." Callahan rolled her eyes. "Please, he's too soft to do anything. He's just another one of those fairness types, always trying to make everyone happy. This'll blow over in a week," but it wouldn't. Judge Ellison was already preparing for the next hearing. He had submitted formal requests for surveillance. Footage, body cam logs, arrest reports, and even notes from Officer Callahan's patrol supervisor. Everything he read and saw only confirmed his suspicion this was not a one-time issue. It was a sign of something deeper. On the day before the next court session, he received a USB drive containing dashcam footage. He watched it alone, in silence. The footage was clear. Darnell had pulled over calmly, kept his hands on the wheel. He answered politely. He looked confused, but never aggressive. Then, out of nowhere, Officer Callahan pulled open his door, told him to step out, and when he asked, "Why?" she pulled him out by the arm and pushed him onto the car. She cuffed him while he said, "I didn't do anything." She never told him why he was being arrested. The judge paused the video. He watched it again and again. He had seen enough. This was no longer just about courtroom behavior. This was about the integrity of justice. Officer Callahan had come into his court believing that she could twist the truth, talk down to a judge, and walk away untouched. But what she didn't know was that Judge Ellison didn't respond with anger. He responded with action. He knew what people like her thought of him: too quiet, too polite, too soft. But he also knew that real power didn't need to shout. It didn't need to humiliate. It needed to expose lies with evidence, not emotion. And that's what he was preparing to do. As the sun set on the courthouse, Judge Ellison turned off the light in his office and walked to the window. The city lights glowed below. He thought about Darnell, thought about the hundreds of young people like him who had been stopped, questioned, and humiliated for nothing more than how they looked or where they lived. He thought about the power of the courtroom, not as a place of punishment, but as a place of truth. Tomorrow, the hearing would resume, but it would not be like the last one. Tomorrow, the courtroom would become something more than a room with four walls and a gavel. It would become a stage where the truth would be shown not by shouting, not by speeches, but by facts. And Officer Callahan, whether she knew it or not, was about to face something she had never expected: a quiet man who believed in justice more than power and who knew exactly how to use both. The city court was more crowded than usual on the morning of the next hearing. People stood in small groups outside the courthouse, whispering and guessing what might happen inside. Journalists had arrived early, holding cameras and microphones, hoping to capture a moment that could turn into headlines. Inside courtroom number 4, seats filled quickly. Lawyers, students, community members, and even some police officers had come to see what had become the most talked about case in the city. Judge Marcus Ellison walked in with the same calm face he always wore. He didn't show emotion, but those who had been in his court before could see a quiet energy in his walk today. He greeted the courtroom, took his seat, and looked around. The case of State v. Darnell Hayes was about to continue, but this time it would be different. Officer Rebecca Callahan arrived in uniform, just like before. Her posture was confident, her expression unchanged. She glanced at the crowd and gave a small smile, as if enjoying the attention. She had been told by her supervisors to remain professional, but she still believed this was nothing more than a judge trying to make an example of her. She had seen it before: judges trying to appear fair by going hard on cops. She didn't think anything would come of it. She still believed she had done her job, but she didn't know what was waiting for her. Darnell Hayes sat beside his attorney, Marissa Lopez, looking calmer than before. His mother sat behind him, holding his hand tightly. It wasn't just fighting for his innocence anymore. He was standing in a courtroom that now felt like the only place left where he might be heard. The hearing began. Judge Ellison looked directly at Officer Callahan. Officer, today we will review new evidence submitted to this court. You are still under oath. Answer honestly. She nodded quickly, not yet realizing what was coming. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as a screen was pulled down. The judge gave a small signal to the technician in the corner, and then clicked. The dashcam footage began. There was no sound in the courtroom. It's just the voice from the video and the image of Darnell's car being pulled over. The footage showed Darnell stopping his vehicle smoothly. He placed his hands on the wheel. The car wasn't speeding. There was no dangerous driving. The taillights were clearly working. The audience leaned forward. Then came the moment when Officer Callahan stepped out of her vehicle and walked up to Darnell's window. Her voice could be heard clearly. "You've got a broken taillight," she said. Darnell responded, "I don't think it's broken, ma'am." "Step out of the car," she ordered immediately. He hesitated and asked, "Why?" "Because I said so," she snapped back. Then she opened the door, grabbed his arm, and yanked him out. Darnell didn't resist. His body was stiff, but he didn't push back or yell. She pushed him against the hood and cuffed him roughly. "I didn't do anything," he said. "That was the entire arrest." When the video ended, the courtroom stayed silent. No one moved. Judge Ellison turned to Officer Callahan. "Do you have anything to say after watching this?" he asked calmly. She looked unsure for the first time. "I followed department policy," she said. "I believed he might have been hiding something." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Hiding what, exactly?" Kept both hands on the wheel. He spoke politely. Asked a simple question. Callahan shifted in her seat. "Sometimes it's not what they say, it's how they act." "And how exactly did he act?" The judge pressed. She paused. "He seemed defensive. And what made you think his behavior was threatening?" Another pause. "I've had experience with suspects like him," she said quietly. A ripple moved through the courtroom. Her words echoed in the air. "Suspects like him." The judge sat back, letting the silence do its work. Then he nodded at Marissa Lopez. The defense attorney stood and approached the screen. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to submit to more videos. The first is traffic camera footage showing Mr. Hayes' vehicle minutes before the stop." She'll see both taillights were fully functional. The video played. It was clear. Both taillights glowed red as the car passed through an intersection. The second video was from the gas station security camera nearby. It showed Darnell filling his car with gas, waving at the store clerk, and then driving off calmly. There were no signs of stress, aggression, or suspicious behavior. He was just a young man going about his day. Marissa turned back to the judge. There was no broken taillight, no aggression, no disturbance. This arrest was based on assumption, not evidence. "Officer," Callahan folded her arms tightly. Her face had lost some of its color. Judge Ellison looked at her again. "Officer, do you remember how you described Mr. Hayes in your report?" She nodded. "Yes." He said he showed signs of hostility, that he resisted commands, that he was a danger to public peace. "Yes. And do you still stand by that report after viewing all this footage?" She hesitated. "The footage may not show everything I felt in that moment. Policing isn't always black and white." The judge's voice stayed soft, but there was steel in it now. "But the law is this court deals in facts, not feelings." There was no applause, no cheers, just silence. The judge turned to the prosecutor. "Do you have any further evidence to justify these charges?" The prosecutor, a middle-aged man who had tried to stay neutral, stood up slowly. "Your Honor, based on the footage and testimony, the state does not object to a motion for dismissal." Judge Ellison nodded, and the charges against Darnell Hayes are dismissed, effective immediately. Darnell's mother began to cry quietly. Darnell looked stunned. He had hoped for this, but he hadn't truly believed it would happen, not after everything he had gone through. But Judge Ellison wasn't finished. He picked up a second file. "Before we conclude, I must address a matter of great concern." Looked around the courtroom. This court has received multiple documents regarding Officer Callahan's prior conduct, including internal complaints and a history of questionable stops, most of which involved young black individuals. Not all resulted in formal action. The pattern is clear and troubling. The courtroom shifted. People looked at one another. Some nodded. Others simply held their breath. "I am recommending an official judicial referral," the judge continued. "This means the officer's conduct will be reviewed by an independent board for potential disciplinary or legal action." Eyes widened. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. "This court cannot ignore the abuse of authority," the judge said. "When a citizen is arrested without cause, when the truth is twisted in official reports, when respect is replaced by ego, the justice system weakens. That is unacceptable." Paused and then looked directly at Callahan. "You came into this courtroom believing you were untouchable, disrespected this court, dismissed the truth, and treated this process like a formality. But this courtroom is not a stage for pride. It is a place for truth. And here, truth always wins." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the judge picked up his gavel and said quietly, "This hearing is adjourned." He struck the gavel once. People slowly began to stand. Some whispered, some stared, some nodded with quiet respect. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered. When word spread that the charges had been dismissed and a referral made against the officer, cheers broke out. Darnell stepped outside with his mother, holding her hand. Reporters swarmed, asking questions. He didn't say much. It's just one sentence. "Today I feel seen." Officer Callahan walked out of a side door, avoiding the cameras. Her face was pale, her expression blank. She had walked into that courtroom with power. She walked out with consequences. Inside, Judge Ellison removed his robe and sat down at his desk. He felt no joy in what had happened. No anger either, only clarity. He had done what needed to be done. The courtroom had worked the way it was meant to. He glanced at the photo on his desk of his father, who had once stood handcuffed on a street corner for nothing more than walking home from work. That memory had never left him. And today, in his own quiet way, he had honored it. Justice doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it comes with silence, truth, and the strength to do what others won't. After the court hearing, the city was buzzing with news about what had happened. The story of Darnell Hayes and Officer Rebecca Callahan had spread through neighborhoods, social media, and news outlets. People talked about the way a judge had looked carefully at the facts and stood up for a young man who had been treated unfairly. The decision to dismiss the charges against Darnell and to refer Officer Callahan for further review sparked many conversations about justice, power, and respect. Judge Marcus Ellison, however, did not see his work as finished. He understood that one case, no matter how important, could not fix a system filled with challenges and biases. After the hearing, he spent more time reviewing reports, talking to community leaders, and meeting with other judges and law enforcement officials who shared his concern about fairness in policing. He knew that justice was not just about one verdict. It was about changing how people thought and acted. He also knew that sometimes change started with one person willing to ask hard questions and stand by the truth, even if it was uncomfortable. The judge's recommendation for an official referral against Officer Callahan moved quickly through the system. An independent review board was formed to examine her conduct in detail. The board included retired judges, legal experts, and members of the community. They looked at every piece of evidence, the dash cam footage, the internal complaint files, and testimonies from citizens who had felt wrongly targeted. During the review, many stories came to light. Citizens told how they had been stopped by Officer Callahan without clear reasons, how they felt humiliated during those stops, and how their complaints had been ignored. Some described being questioned aggressively while simply walking on the street or driving home from work. The board's investigation showed a troubling pattern of behavior that raised serious questions about her judgment and respect for the people she was sworn to protect. Meanwhile, Darnell's life slowly began to return to normal, but the experience left a lasting impact on him and his family. He had been through a stressful ordeal, publicly arrested, judged, questioned on. He knew many others had suffered in silence for far longer. His mother, Gloria, encouraged him to share his story to help others understand the importance of standing up for their rights. Darnell began attending community meetings and youth groups, where he spoke about his experience. He talked about how important it was to remain calm, know your rights, and seek support from lawyers or advocates when needed. His voice became a symbol of hope for many young people who felt powerless against the system. At the same time, Officer Callahan faced consequences she hadn't expected. The independent review board found that her actions had violated several department policies, including abuse of authority and failure to follow proper arrest procedures. The board recommended disciplinary action, including suspension and retraining. Some community members called for her dismissal. However, the process was not easy. Callahan had supporters. To some colleagues believed she was being unfairly targeted, that she was just doing her job under difficult circumstances. The police union got involved, arguing that the judge's criticism was too harsh and that officers needed room to make quick decisions on the street. The debate grew heated. Some saw Callahan as a symbol of problems within the police force, while others saw her as a victim of political pressure and media attention. The city found itself divided. Judge Ellison watched these developments closely. He had expected resistance, but remained committed to his belief in accountability and fairness. He arranged meetings with police leaders, community activists, and city officials to encourage open dialogue and honest reflection. He stressed that real change required cooperation, training, and a willingness to listen, not just punishment. In one such meeting, a veteran police chief told him, "Marcus, people like Officer Callahan are a product of our system. We need to fix the training and culture, not just blame individuals." The judge nodded. "Exactly. We must create an environment where respect and fairness are not optional but expected." As the months passed, the city slowly began to see shifts. The police department introduced new training programs focused on community engagement, cultural sensitivity, and de-escalation techniques. Officers were encouraged to build trust rather than rely on force or intimidation. Community leaders were invited to participate in oversight committees to ensure transparency. Darnell continued to be active in the community, helping to organize youth workshops on legal rights and how to handle encounters with law enforcement. He dreamed of becoming a lawyer one day. It's inspired by the judge who had listened to his story and fought for his dignity. One afternoon, Judge Ellison received a letter from Darnell. It was a simple note filled with gratitude and hope. "Thank you for believing in me," Darnell wrote. "Because of you, I believe I can make a difference too." The judge smiled as he read the letter. It reminded him why he had chosen this path, to make sure that every person, no matter their background, could be treated with fairness and respect. At the same time, Officer Callahan was working to rebuild her career. She accepted the disciplinary actions and began retraining. Her attitude slowly changed as she confronted the realities of her past mistakes. Some officers watched her closely, unsure if she could truly change, while others believed in second chances. The story of the arrogant officer who disrespected a judge, and the judge's verdict that changed everything, became more than just a court case. It became a lesson for a city struggling with division and distrust. It showed that even when power seemed to protect the wrongs, the truth could break through with patience and courage. The courtroom, once a place of conflict and confrontation, became a symbol of hope and justice. And Judge Marcus Ellison, the quiet man who believed in fairness more than pride, continued to work behind the scenes, reminding everyone that real change was possible, but only if people were willing to listen, learn, and act. After the intense months that followed the court verdict, the community still felt the ripples of the case. The story of Darnell Hayes and Officer Rebecca Callahan became a symbol of something much bigger: a struggle for fairness, respect, and change in a system that often seemed unfair to many people. Darnell's life had changed in ways he never expected. Though the charges against him were dropped, the experience of being arrested, judged, and publicly questioned left a deep mark. He carried the memory of that day with him, the fear, confusion, and embarrassment, but he also carried something stronger: hope and determination. He had started volunteering regularly with local groups that worked with young people. Many of these youths had faced problems similar to his own. Darnell shared his story openly, explaining how important it was to know one's rights and to stand up for oneself. Even when the system seemed stacked against you, one day, during a community event, a young teenager came up to Darnell nervously. "I'm scared," she said quietly. "I don't want to get stopped by the police like you did." Darnell smiled gently. "It's okay to be scared," he said. "But the best thing is to stay calm, be respectful, and know your rights. And if something feels wrong, tell someone you trust." These conversations helped Darnell feel like he was doing something meaningful. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was a voice of change. Meanwhile, Officer Callahan's life had taken a very different path. After the official review, she faced suspension from the police force and was required to attend several months of retraining classes. The disciplinary actions hurt her pride deeply. She had always believed that she was doing her duty to keep people safe. Now, she had to admit that she had made serious mistakes. At first, Callahan was defensive. She spoke to a few reporters, insisting that she had only been trying to do her job. But as the retraining progressed, she started to hear things she had never fully considered before: the experiences of people she had stopped, their fears and frustrations, and the importance of respect and fairness in every encounter. One day, during a class on community policing, the instructor asked, "How does it feel when someone treats you like you're a threat without knowing who you are?" Callahan was silent for a moment, then spoke quietly. "It feels like you don't matter." That moment marked a turning point for her. She began to reflect deeply on her behavior and the culture she had been part of. She realized that being a good officer was not just about following orders or enforcing laws. It was about understanding people, earning their trust, and treating them with dignity. Some officers supported her efforts to change. Others remained skeptical. Callahan knew the road ahead would be hard, but she was determined to try. At the same time, the police department as a whole began to change. Following Judge Ellison's call for reform, new policies were introduced to promote fairness and reduce bias. Officers received training on cultural sensitivity and de-escalation, focusing on communication rather than confrontation. Community advisory boards were formed, allowing citizens to give feedback and hold police accountable. These changes were not easy or quick. Many officers struggled to adjust. Some citizens remained suspicious, worried that nothing would really change. But small moments of progress started to appear, officers stopping to talk with community members instead of rushing to arrest. Neighborhood meetings where police and residents shared concerns honestly, and fewer complaints about harassment. Judge Ellison stayed involved quietly, offering guidance and support. He met with community leaders regularly and encouraged the police department to keep listening to the people they served. He believed that real justice came from understanding and respect, not just punishment or rules. Meanwhile, Darnell continued to grow. Inspired by his experience in court and the judge's fair treatment, he decided to pursue a career in law. He wanted to help others like him who faced unfair treatment and needed someone to stand up for their rights. He enrolled in college, studying criminal justice and law. Driven by a passion to make a difference, his family was proud but also cautious, knowing how hard the path could be. They reminded him to stay grounded and focused, to use his voice wisely, and to never forget where he came from. Over time, Darnell became a respected figure in his community, not just because of what had happened to him, but because of how he chose to respond. He volunteered at legal clinics, spoke at schools, and worked with organizations fighting for justice reform. His story inspired others to believe that change was possible. The case between Darnell and Officer Callahan also led to broader conversations in the city. Local politicians promised to support police reform and invest in community programs. Activists held rallies and workshops to educate people about their rights. The media covered the progress and setbacks honestly, helping keep the conversation alive. In the police department, some officers embraced the new culture. They learned to value empathy and dialogue. Others resisted, clinging to old ways and attitudes. But the shift was undeniable. Officer Callahan, after completing her retraining, returned to duty with a different mindset. She focused on building trust in the neighborhoods she served. It was not easy, and she faced suspicion and skepticism from residents who remembered her past actions. But she showed up every day, ready to listen and learn. She never forgot the day she faced Judge Ellison in court. It was a moment that humbled her deeply and changed her forever. Judge Ellison, too, continued his quiet work on justice. He believed the system could improve if more people chose fairness over pride and respect over arrogance. He often thought about the power of truth and how it could break down walls built by fear and prejudice. Looking back on the whole experience, he felt a mix of emotions: sadness for the pain caused, hope for the progress made, and determination to keep fighting for what was right in the end. The story of the arrogant white officer who disrespected a black judge and the judge's verdict that changed everything was about much more than one court case. It was about people learning to see each other as human beings, about facing uncomfortable truths, and about the power of courage and fairness to transform lives. The journey was far from over, but the seed of change had been planted, and that seed would grow, slowly but surely, into a better future for everyone.